Okay, so we're going to continue talking about biomes here, and this focuses again on the aquatic side of biomes, looking at the diversity and the variety of biomes in the aquatic ecosystem. In the last lecture, we started talking about this process called eutrophication, rapid increase in the nutrient load of an aquatic system. Now, the nutrient load that we primarily focus on is nitrogen and phosphorus, or phosphates. The reason for this is that both of these nutrients are incredibly important when we talk about the producer base, the primary productivity. So the concern is, as eutrophication is occurring, you get a lot of this nitrogen and phosphates flushing into the aquatic system. It accumulates, it builds up, and it can lead to significant problems over time. So as that producer base gets larger, back to this one, the producer base gets larger, it supports a larger consumer group, but then when the producer base crashes, especially in the Midwest, because of just seasonal changes, it crashes, and we see all of this die off here. Oxygen starts getting sucked out of the water during the decomposition process. So you deplete oxygen, you deplete the nutrient or the producer base, and your consumers up here begin to crash as well. And that further fuels more food for decomposers, meaning more oxygen getting sucked out in this whole cascading event. Depending upon how big the producer base got, you may have established a very, very high level species, high top level species, 5 steps up in the trophic pyramid here, which it shouldn't be there because a natural normal producer base shouldn't be that big. So then when you pull the rug out from underneath the community by crashing your producers, your top level consumers suffer, and sometimes they get pushed into extinction. So as this oxygen is getting sucked out, it leads to a thing called the dead zone. All right, so let me show you these little videos. Let me get this loaded up. There is a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico happening every single year. It's happened probably for the existence of humans, but it's getting worse and worse and worse every year because of eutrophication. And what we're seeing is, let me go to red here, all of the land in the Midwest, all of this land here that I'm trying to highlight, is all part of what we call the watershed that will contribute to the Mississippi River. So all these states, all these different land regions drain eventually into the Mississippi, and that dumps into the Gulf of Mexico. So all the way up into Montana, Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, Ohio, etc., etc. Go back to geography class or geology class. All those states contribute. And if you think about what a lot of those states do, is we produce a lot of agriculture in those states. And in agriculture, we use a large amount of nitrogen as a fertilizer. A lot of that runs off. We use phosphates in other industries. That runs off into these rivers and streams and lakes that eventually all tributary into the Gulf of Mexico. Alright, so here's our little video. That link will take you to this page. And this is showing us what's going on here, what's making a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. All of that stuff draining into that environment. So when we're getting this dead zone to form, it creates a problem. So Mississippi River water rolls into the Gulf of Mexico. Fresh water layer on top of the salt. You got your fish and your shrimp. We get those when we go out to the restaurant in town, you have your oysters, clams, etc. Now when nitrogen and phosphorus from fertilizers come in, that feeds algae. Algae grows very similar to plants. It likes fertilizer, so you're exploding the algae population, getting this bloom. Now then the algae dies, which it just naturally dies, and it sinks to the bottom, and it gets decomposed. And as it's decomposed, oxygen is sucked out of the water. So now you're depleting the oxygen from your water. Things that can move, get the heck out of there. Those fish, they're going to leave. But things that can't really get out of there, they're going to suffocate and they're going to die. So you say, well, how does this really impact me? Oh, I want to go fishing. Nothing to fish for. Or let's go back to, let me back up to the map to give you a better picture. Nope. Okay, so let me use the other map, it's a better one. Alright, so I'm going to the Gulf, or I have a fishing business in the Gulf of Mexico, and I'm going to go out and get some shrimp. Think about how far do I have to go to get shrimp. If I go this far, where I'm trying to draw my little circle, maybe that takes me an hour-and-a-half boat ride. I consume $300 of fuel. I catch my shrimp, I bring them back. I factor in my fuel and my time into the cost of the shrimp when I'm selling it, and then that translates to the shrimp you're buying in the store or at the restaurant in Springfield. There's your price. Well, now the dead zone's getting bigger. I have to go further out to catch my shrimp as a fisherman. It means I've increased my fuel cost, increased my time, which means the price of the shrimp's going to go up. That translates back to an increase in the price of shrimp when you're sitting at that restaurant in Springfield. This is how everything connects. This is why I said the hydrological cycle, it all circles around, and it does come back to us. Maybe not directly, but indirectly, we are paying for what we're doing to the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, so other biomes associated with the aquatic ecosystem are biomes like the estuaries. Estuaries are what we call the marine nursery. These are the interface between the saltwater and freshwater. Okay, so this is right at the mouth of the river as it empties into the ocean. Challenging environment, because at high tide, you're really salty. At low tide, you're really freshwater. And that changes hourly. As the tides go in, the tides go out, that is changing. So it's a pretty stressful environment. But it is an incredibly important one. This has an incredibly high producer productivity and biodiversity. It's estimated about 75% of the fish you will see in the ocean were born in the estuary. This is our nursery. So the concern is, as all of that, I'm going to go back to this one, as all of those nutrients dump into the estuary and they've increased in concentration because they built up throughout the entire watershed as it was carried down here, what are we doing to the nursery? What are we doing if we pollute and eutrophiate the nursery? How is that going to impact fish populations that are supposed to grow up here and swim out to the reef, there's our reef, and live on the coral reef? What we do in the Midwest impacts coral reef because of the dead zone and the nutrient load in the fish populations. So estuaries are prime breeding grounds and rest stops and feeding stations for lots and lots of species. It's one of the most diverse communities when we look at aquatic land communities. I mean, the rainforests are the biggest on land, coral reefs are the biggest in the ocean, but these guys are kind of that interface. They serve both environments. They serve the aquatic environment, they serve the terrestrial environment. So we don't want to mess up our nurseries. That's not a good thing. Pushing out further into the ocean, we see the ocean has a bunch of currents in it. These are the way the water moves. Early sailors navigated their direction of travel based on the currents. So when we look at the currents, ocean currents can influence the climate of a land biome. So you get a cold current, brings in cold air, cold water, cold temperatures. Get a warm current, brings in warm air, warm waters, warm temperatures. Okay, so it influences the climate of land biomes as well as aquatic biomes. So think about North America, and we have the Gulf Stream on our east coast. That's fairly warm water. That water rolls up here, goes to Europe. That's why Western Europe has a similar climate to North America. If we jump all the way back for a second and look at the land biomes, look at the big map. There it is. Notice the east coast of the U.S. has a temperate deciduous forest. So does Western Europe. That is due to the Gulf Stream going like this and creating a very similar biome. Even though it's thousands of miles apart, an ocean apart, we have the same very, very similar biome as Western Europe because of those ocean currents. The water itself dictates life. The temperatures. You look at all of these warm currents. Those are the solid lines down here. All those warm currents, those are regions where we find coral reefs. Most of those are equatorial, along the edge of coasts. There's your Great Barrier Reef. There's your Mesoamerican Reef, along the coast of Central America. Where we find the cold currents, we have a different type of aquatic ecosystem. So don't expect to find corals in cold current. You guys go to California for spring break or for vacation, you're on the west coast, that water there is going to be cold. It's always going to be cold because that part of the Japan current is a cold current. So again, that influences the currents, the ocean currents, the directions, the temperatures influence the ocean biomes as well as the land-based biomes. But if we jump into the ocean and we go through the different layers of the ocean, we'll see a similar pattern as we saw in that lake. Surface layer, epipelagic zone. This is where light penetrates. So we get a lot of producers here in the form of phytoplankton. We go deeper, we start getting darker, and we lose light down here. But we have things down here that feed off of what was living in the epipelagic zone. We go even deeper and we get into the bathypelagic zone. This is where all these crazy things are living that we're still discovering. No light reaches bathypelagic zone. It's pitch black. So the life down there is adapted to this environment. Incredibly cold, pressure, no light, but we got a bunch of life down there anyway. It is adapted to that environment. We're discovering new things every time we get down into the bathypelagic zone. And then ultimately, the very, very bottom of the ocean is the abyssal zone. The abyss. It's the bottom of the ocean there. And life exists. Life lives in the bottom of the ocean, and it is very functional. The diversity is limited because most of it is just feeding off of what trickles down through the water and eventually gets down there. Some life is dependent upon chemical energy in the form of bacteria producing, or archaea producing chemical energy and being the base of the ecosystem down there. But a limited diversity because it's a tough environment. No light, incredible pressure, and cold. We just don't know a lot about it. But the most diverse part of the ocean is the coral reef. Greatest biodiversity in the ocean. This is the area we want to preserve. The problem is it's highly stressed, and we see huge problems coming at us. It has an incredibly importance to humans. So we'll be talking more about the coral reefs when we get into conservation biology and the issues we're seeing there, but most of them are under major stress. All right, so we'll check that out when we get into that conservation biology lecture.